I think if you were going to do something like that, I would have looked at maybe at the portals that people are accessing more than anything else, rather than the devices. Um, because I think when you start getting into the devices, I think you really start going down a rabbit hole about, do you have permission to do that or not? And I know that's been kind of a big discussion for data privacy, but it's one of those things where I think you have to be very careful about not ruining an investigation by introducing something else that probably could also bring legal action to it as well. That's my first initial thought, I'd say.
I would say we need to bring pizza into the mix because, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So let's bring a pizza team involved.
Pizza's always welcome.
I
Thank you.
forgot about the pizza part.
Good to know.
Welcome back to the Information Week podcast. I'm your host, Zhao Pierre Ruth, Senior Editor. And today's episode, we are having a discussion on realigning after a tech disruption. Tech disruptions could be there's some issue internally with the computer IT systems that an organization is maintaining and operating. There could be a third-party matter that comes into play that is outside of an organization's hands. There could be something that goes beyond even a third-party technology issue where there is some kind of act of nature or other issue that then affects the tech disruption, introduces a tech disruption within organizations, and then organizations then have to figure out not only ways to resolve the technical and mechanical issues, but then also work on the spirit of the organization and even their clients to say, hey, we've got things back under control. We're ready to rock and roll again. So for this discussion today, I am joined by Allan Leinwand, CTO for Webflow.
Hi, JP. How are you?
Doing all right.
Nice to be here.
Glad you're here, Allan. And friend of the show, Pierre DeBois, founder and CEO of Zimana. Pierre, good to be seeing you again.
Good to be here. Glad to join this discussion.
Okay, great. All right. So we've definitely, every organization has either seen or even dealt with different types of things that have caused a kerfuffle with their technology stack at some point, or they have watched things out in the world and say, oh, thank goodness it wasn't us, at least this time. So, Allan, very interested in hearing about how you and your organization understand that in July, your company, there was some availability disruption that last few days. Could you break down what happened and how you responded, and then also kind of speak to how the nature of what was going on?
Yeah, happy to do that. So, hi, I'm Allan Leinwand. I'm CTO here at Webflow. Webflow is responsible for helping folks design and build and then operate millions of websites sort of across the planet for very large customers, New York Times, Dropbox, lots of folks like that. So you're right. Back in late July, we experienced a disruption. It wasn't actually for multiple days. It was up and down for a period of multiple days. And, to a lot of our customers, that did feel like multiple days, to be fair. The other thing is, while we said the timeline was about 3 days, we actually kept the incident open for an additional day beyond when full remediation occurred, just to make sure we were fully out of the woods and we had a full cycle of operational health for a full day. But in general, what happened is, or more specifically what happened is, we have two parts of Webflow. We have what we call the designer and the dashboard, the things that people use to build and administer their websites. And then we have the hosted websites themselves. So once the websites are up and running, the things that you and I hit every single day out on the web. So importantly, 100% of all hosted websites, 100% of all customers' published websites were up, never had an issue, never saw a single issue. What we did see was a bit of a malicious traffic attack. And by that, I don't mean like a full-on DDoS where we get hit by tens of millions of packet flows or anything like that. But, don't want to talk about too many details on this one, but we saw a particular type of data hitting a particular endpoint that triggered a performance issue on some of our backend database structures. Those backend database clusters failed. They were fully redundant. We have 16 of them on the back end. One of them suffered a bit of a redundancy issue. We were promoting the secondary to the primary to secondary, quickly trying to make things work. We actually scaled up those database clusters along the way. that had an additional knockdown effect. And we suffered, and our customers suffered trying to get into that administration of the websites or building new websites, making changes for up and down for like a period of a couple of days. So it was a pretty bad few days is probably the nicest way of putting it. Our focus on this one was really restoring stability to people who are building websites. And then we were trying to do our best to communicate as transparently as possible with our customers throughout the entire incident. It really wasn't our best day or days, but it was something that we think was something we needed to be transparent about, and we needed to address directly with our customers.
Gotcha. And how quickly the initial awareness that there was a problem, how quickly did you realize that the situation was more than just like a brief hiccup and like that might, it'll fix itself. It'll be fine. Just kick it, turn it on and off. How quickly did you realize, hey, wait a minute, this is something, there were some more significant things happening here than just some kind of quick issue?
Within minutes is probably the nicest way of putting it. We saw that our backend database infrastructure was suffering in a pretty bizarre way. We saw what you might consider latency for reads and writes on this particular cluster almost go straight vertical. And at that point, we knew that we were going to have an issue. So we saw the scale and persistence of the problem almost immediately. We have alerts, we have monitoring, we have rollbacks. We mobilized our full incident process. We're probably in a Zoom call with ourselves and the vendor within 5 minutes of seeing this initially happen. So that meant pulling in cross-functional leadership, prioritizing updates to our partners. We have hundreds of thousands of partners. We have hundreds of thousands, millions of websites out there that we needed to make sure we are treating it as both a major technical event and one that allowed our customers to figure out how to move forward.
Gotcha. So let's look at the fact that, you had, there were a couple of different things happening at the same time. You've got something malicious, third party, and then the performance issues. How do you go about prioritizing the remedies for the situation? Do you focus on locking things down, to halt, the malicious aggressions, or do you, say, well, we got to, test to check out the performance issues? Where do you start to, triage things and get started?
Yeah, we actually triage multiple streams at once. So we did see the malicious queries coming in. So we did have one particular work stream that quickly spun up to do things like adding, specific firewall rules and IP address blocks to make sure we were doing that. We spun up another thread to work with our vendor to make sure we could scale up the database infrastructure on the back end, make sure as we failed from secondary to primary and then primary back to secondary and scaled up the entire cluster, we were doing that. We also had a third thread that was working on communications with our customers and partners. And then actually a fourth thread that we were sort of a fourth work stream where we're trying to make sure we're getting ahead of the issue and thinking through, is there anything that these changes we're making would have a knockdown effect later on? So we didn't treat it as a lockdown first and test later, but more of like divide and conquer. One into stopping the event from occurring, second into scaling up the back end, third into working on communications, and fourth into thinking through how could we move forward with the changes that we're planning on making.
And how much, going through this process, can gauge like how much of a, I guess, if it was even an overhaul or just like changes that were being made, that followed? I mean, was it like a quick, gut reaction is like, for some people will be like, oh, we've got to toss out, this security and we've got to get something else completely new in because that apparently that failed. Do you say, oh no, the infrastructure is bad. We've got to, start from the ground up and rebuild everything. How much work, how much did you, really have to like kind of like dig in and change things just to, to recover, but then also get, kind of restabilize going forward?
Yeah, I don't think it was a ground up rebuild. It was like targeted resilience work. We added things like stricter rate limiting. We introduced a new set of circuit breakers. We optimized sort of our database efficiency and backend. We upgraded hardware along the way. We tightened change controls and processes. Internally, the way we thought about it was to frame it to the team as this was critical resilience and reliability work that had to be prioritized. I always say, like, we have to fix customer issues fast. We have to make sure that they don't happen again. And then we need to make sure we build really cool, innovative products. So this was really in the fix the customer issue fast and make sure it doesn't happen again. And then think through how do we make sure that our resiliency and reliability going forward, which by the way, it has been since that event, we've been 100%, it's really been paying a lot of dividends for us. So it wasn't a, hey, that security firewall waffle was a problem. We need to throw that technology out. It was more of like, can we get tighter on our operational processes and really target our resilience work to make sure that this never happens again?
Gotcha. And how did you really go about getting the team really kind of like mentally and performally, back on track and confident in, it's like, okay, crisis has been dealt with. We can move forward in a more, get back to business, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah, we need to get back to business, but we also need to regain the trust of our customers. So I always say it's not that you have an incident. Put a lot of humans on a lot of computers together, and we're at a very, very large scale. Well, things are going to break. So what I say is like, it's not that we had an incident, it's what we do next that counts. So what we did next was take action to make sure that we restore trust with our customers. And that's how we approached it. So I think what customers want to hear when they're going through an incident with their vendor is, we've identified the problem, we've made sure it's not going to happen again, and then here's a set of action items that we're going to take with dates. So we did that, and we actually published a blog, and I published a list of action items, and then I published a detailed RCA as well. So all of our customers knew exactly what had happened, exactly what actions we had taken, that we had dates and we were committed to getting it done, and that most of those action items were already completed. So that meant really rallying the team around that urgency, that accountability about aggressively remediating those action items, and then essentially then monitoring the metrics to know that we were in a spot that we were stable again, and we could go back to business as usual. Now, we're not going back to business as usual, to be fair. We're going back to a new hardened mode, a new mode where we have better metrics, better reporting, better observability, better security rules in place. So it really meant showing customers that not just that we fix things, but we've made the entire system stronger for the long run.
Okay, great. All right. Thank you for that. All right. Now, Pierre, these questions actually, dovetail, well off of what Allan was talking about, the questions I have for you. Looking at that customer side, that customer aspect, how do you handle like the external questions about the disruption to your company and your services? And, do you try to respond immediately to assure customers that the situation is being resolved? Do you take some time to like give yourself some breathing room before rushing out a hasty response? If everyone sees there's a kerfuffle of some sort, how do you kind of like really measure how quickly you need to get word out to them?
That's a good question. I think the speed at which you respond is important, but it's also the quality of the response. And there are going to be some issues that maybe do need to have that need to be measured in how you respond, because you still don't know all the details behind it. But you still need to communicate to your customers that, hey, we are on top of this. We are looking at what's going on. So, and I'll say from an analytics perspective, we've had to deal with clients where upfront we have to say, hey, here are the things that are impacting that customer experience, and here are the things that we need to investigate to kind of get nailed down. And just listening to Allan quite a bit, I'll say this, in 16 years, we've been in business. Things that have been purely front end now have this sort of real impact on the back end for a lot of things that are going on, because so much of the data is not just coming from something that's been ingested from a database. It's also coming in from portals that the customers have access to, even APIs to apps as well too. So that dealing with a crisis, you need to kind of just tell the customers what it is that's going on, at least at the beginning. Definitely, if you need to investigate, give them at least some sort of idea what the process is that you're going to try to follow and get more information out to that customer. But I think the important thing, particularly you were talking about the B2B, is managing the message as much as possible. As if they see that coming from you, even when something might be a little bit bad, and even if you're trying to be accountable, I think people will really they'll appreciate the fact that you're trying to manage that as best as possible, because that's what they're looking for, is some level of certainty even among chaos.
So looking at that, wanting to give the certainty amid chaos. There may be details that IT or security just do not want to be made public when you're talking about what's going on. Yeah, how do you kind of really craft that response to the clients, to the customers, that preserves sensitive information while also informing the customers, informing the public to the extent that they really need to be aware of what's happening?
I think when you're outlining the process of how you're investigating and how you'll be transparent, I think it's important to identify just a little bit of not so much the incident or maybe with the data, but definitely just that it's a touch point where you do need to kind of make sure that you're not releasing that information that probably should not be released from a legal standpoint. So much of data, the big challenge is that so much of the data, when we start thinking about it, it starts at this high level of just information, and it's how we blend it together that starts becoming personally identifiable information in a lot of ways. A picture with a license plate in it needs to be boxed out so that way you're not kind of releasing some sort of identification of that plate to an individual. Those sort of things, if you're dealing with pictures, that's something you have to kind of be a little sensitive about. So what you want to do is when you are telling that process, I think that the key to it is identifying where within that process that you are trying to sort through and make sure that that certain information that is supposed to be private remains private. I think most times customers need to hear that you are working on a process. And I think that part is probably the most reassuring of everything at this point. So.
I think, I mean, I definitely, you know, wanted to kind of look at further, what kind of reassurances the customers might say, hey, I want to have real confidence, after disruption. What kinds of things do customers typically want to hear from an organization after something has happened? Even if they are bombastic, what kind of guarantees, might customers kind of raise to an organization to say, hey, please, show us that we can feel confident in working with you, trusting you again.
Definitely. I think sometimes it's also about if I think particularly for B2B, if your clients understand what processes they have in general, sometimes that can help in the explanation. Basically, it's just like if you explain to a somebody who owns a Corvette or a Porsche. The idea that you're explaining to them that why you have to do something with the engine, it has something to do with the oil, has something to do with maybe an overhead cam. That person is, most sports car drivers are very, very aware of their vehicles. And I think it's the same thing when you're talking about data. Really, when you talk about process, just kind of giving some idea of where within that process that you think that you need to investigate. I think giving some hint of that is transparency and gives your customers or impacted partners a chance to figure out and adjust. And I think that's really important. Like I said at the beginning, it's very important with data because we now have so many different ways of importing data into not only a database, but if we talk about large language models and RAG, there needs to be some, what are the devices are, we love agentic AI, but what are the devices in that system that's being impacted if there's an impact on data or some sort of process, basically.
Based on the nature of what the disruption was, IT and security might then say that customers might need to change how they are interacting with the product or the service in order to improve, improve cyber defenses, for example. That could mean graduating from, passwords to biometrics, for example. What's the best way to relate to those customers, if and when there are new technical demands that might be part of interacting with your company? How do you get across to them like, yes, it's going to be different from what you've been doing, but this is why we need to make these changes?
I think something like I'm going to make it sound very, very simple, but I think it's part of it is video, having some sort of town hall to explain what those changes are. And and I mentioned video, but there's depending on your audience, you have a number of different channels that your customers and clients interact with you. If let's say that they are using Discord heavily, you have an opportunity with Discord to bring people into a town hall and with video walk through what the process is that people should be doing, and also answer questions as well too. Um, I think the biggest part of this is understanding what channels do your customers, and if it's B2B, if you have partners, what channels do those partners use frequently in order to get a message out? And I think that's probably the most important, because you'll start figuring out how to get the message out to the audience fastest, and then looking at things like maybe if it's emailed as a follow-up, something like that that might help. But you have to look at which platforms and channels that your customers use to get information, and keep letting them know to pay attention to that channel where you message the improvements and changes that are in the process.
Oh, great. Pierre,
I'll,
thank
I'll
you.
just offer up in our world, I come from running engineering team to ServiceNow, Slack, and Shopify, and we would use Slack channel for partners all the time. We would communicate directly to them. I think what Pierre says about crafting the message is super important. But I've been in situations where whenever there's been outages or incidents, I'm usually talking to technical people. And the thing that technical people don't want is they don't want the marketing beef. They want like the next click down of the technical detail. And usually I'll just start the conversation with, we're accountable. We own this issue. It might have been a third party, but we chose that third party. It might have been us. We wrote the code. So let me tell you technically what we're doing. It's very hard to have those conversations, I think, in very wide forums, like in Reddit posts like we did, or in blog posts like we did. But one-on-one with our most important customers who do reach out, we do share more technical information. I think that gives them more confidence than perhaps if they read in other channels. It's just a thought there.
Great thoughts. And Allan, Pierre, great insights for all the questions that you've been facing. Appreciate both of your experiences and your insights in that. Now comes for the fun part. My game screen is out for those who are listening. I've taken out the Ninja Turtles game screen. It is time for my favorite part, the tabletop exercises. Those new to the show, now it's time for Questionable Ideas Are Us, where we have a fictional company where our tabletop exercise will unfold. This is a time where our esteemed guests, Allan and Pierre, will be on to tackle some outrageous scenarios, inspired a bit by real-world IT strategy challenges, but also thrown in with some flavor from me. So let's see how you, Allan and Pierre, navigate the chaos that I've put together for you with dealing with Questionable Ideas Are Us. Now, as a disclaimer for my guests, the scenarios have not been shared in advance, so they have no idea what I have concocted. While these scenarios are intentionally over the top, they do speak to today's topic. And also, the panelists are not responsible for the presence of hobgoblins and kobolds in these sessions, because it's essentially D&D, or for those of you who know, Critical Role for the C-suite. So, okay, Allan, Pierre, I want you to imagine that you've been brought on as interim. Allan, you'll be the interim CTO for Questionable Ideas Are Us, and Pierre, you'll be the interim CEO. And you're going to have to deal with the organization in its current condition, I'm sorry to say. Okay. All right. The building that Questionable Ideas Are Us calls home suffered a plumbing issue that cascaded into flooding of most of the premises. The building had to be evacuated, and the damage included some shorted out on-prem servers. But there's a silver lining, if you can call it that, given this crisis, that the data was backed up. After 3 days, the office was repaired, and the team was able to return. 1 month later, a rival company beat Questionable Ideas Are Us on several contracts. Deals that were under active negotiations. There's some suspicions and early evidence pointing to a cybersecurity breach that occurred during the flooding. Now, Larry the lawyer is rocking back and forth in the corner, muttering that your company will be sued because sensitive customer data may have been stolen. Sued unless you can find fault in a third-party security software or an employee. Harold from HR has compiled a list of disgruntled current and former employees as potential suspects. He wants to track their data, access, and movements, including personal devices, in order to ID a potential culprit. How do you address the breach investigation and reassure the company's clients about their sensitive information going forward?
I guess I'm a little concerned on the tracking in the part of the story.
You are meant to be.
That gets my attention immediately. You don't want to, how can I put this? While I think investigating is important, I think I think that you want to err on the side of caution about trying to track everything from everybody, and without some sort of permission put in. I know that you want to I know that the investigator would want to look at possible sources of where data is breached. Um, I think if you were going to do something like that, I would have looked at maybe at the portals that people are accessing more than anything else, rather than the devices. Because I think when you start getting into the devices, I think you really start going down a rabbit hole about, do you have permission to do that or not? And I know that's been kind of a big discussion for data privacy, but it's one of those things where I think you have to be very careful about not ruining an investigation by introducing something else that probably could also bring legal action to it as well. That's my first initial thought, I'd say.
I would say we need to bring pizza into the mix because Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So let's bring a pizza team involved.
Pizza's always welcome.
I
Thank you
forgot about the pizza
Good-
part.
good to know.
Good catch, Allan.
One thing it's my job. One thing that I think is interesting here is correlation versus causation. The two things that you described, I'm not convinced are correlated. So I would be looking to see if a flooding event and a server downtime plus a competitor winning bids a month later equaled need to find correlation of data loss or data breach events. So the first thing I would be thinking through is, can we construct a timeline that is credible, that we could explain to a customer? Second, if we can, and maybe it is true, maybe there was flooding, the server is down, the backup server got infiltrated somehow. If we could find that particular correlation and causation and find the metrics associated with it, I'd want to build a timeline and explain that to the potential customers so they could understand what we saw, why we saw it, why there is correlation. And then I would be looking at the various remediation techniques in terms of securing that data before I would, as Pierre said, maybe start breaching private devices. Because I think it'd be pretty interesting to explain to a customer that I know you're about to churn from us and go to a competitor, but the way we're solving it is by snooping on everyone's cell phone. That feels a little odd. So I was trying to put that linearity together in my head. And I couldn't come up with a good story, but maybe the data will prove there is a story there. So my first reaction is, let's see if we can find out this correlation or causation and go from there. And eat some pizza.
Yep.
Eating pizza while also maintaining your ethics. I like it. I like it indeed. That's where it was actually took some inspiration to something I covered years and years and years ago, where there was an organization where I believe they had it was either a fire or some kind of tree collapse that did require them to be out of office. And this does go back into the way back times before we were all running around with devices that could even be really tracked. But somebody did gain some access, physical access to their computer. Somebody who was a former disgruntled former employee. So in that particular case, slightly different circumstances, but yeah, you definitely maintain the integrity of principal ideas are us. And Larry the lawyer should hopefully stop rocking in the corner worrying about being sued. Hopefully in another day or two. Okay, well done, gentlemen. All right, scenario 2. Now, while Questionable Ideas or Us recovers from the flood breach incident, as it's now being called, two rival groups within the company, two very familiar rival groups within the company, approach leadership with different proposals to prevent something like this from ever happening again. First in are the hashtag hobgoblins, who say now is the time to go fully remote with virtual offices, cloud first, nothing on-prem, regardless of regulatory requirements that mandate such sensitive data cannot be handed off this way. They don't care about what the feds say in terms of the sensitivity of information. They say just put it out there. That'll make everything better. Meanwhile, the kobolds say it is time for a harsh, old school lockdown. They want everything on-prem with biometrically controlled key fob access for every app, software, email, instant message, and database. I must warn you that the kobolds are all wearing robes and are ready to extract blood samples from the staff immediately. How do you address the forward-looking cybersecurity concerns and social engineering that may have contributed to the breach?
I'll start there. I think in times of crisis, large architectural changes, as in just put it all in the cloud, poses a series of operational risks that organizations might not be prepared for. Like when we went through some of our incidents, it could have been as easy as throw that database away, go to something else. But when those topics were brought up, my first reaction was, yes, but we've never operated that at scale. And there will be other issues. So unless we're prepared for that and fully versed in how to handle that, that doesn't seem like a realistic approach. The second approach of, biometric eye readers and blood samples before you can access anything feels like it puts too much friction into getting to the pizza for everyone. And I would suggest that productivity can be balanced with the right security concerns, especially since the second approach doesn't seem to violate what the feds want us to do from a regulatory point of view. So I want to be regulatorily compliant because that'll make the customers happy. It'll make their auditors happy. So the first approach, I think, is a non-starter, to be honest. The second approach, I think, balanced with a look at terms of security and productivity balanced together is how I'd approach it. And then one way I'd measure that, because whenever I think about these things, I think about how to measure it, is I would maybe make some changes, harden some things down, and then I'd run a developer survey, maybe a month, 3 months, 6 months later, and see where the friction points, and if those friction points that we've installed really do make us more secure, or whether they're just pure friction.
Yeah, I agree with Alan. And I know this is supposed to be a fun exercise too, but I think both instances are really extreme for a couple of reasons. Alan touched upon it with the second one in particular. I think for cloud too, I think it's a I think people love the convenience of it, but the problem becomes with the type of data that you have, there may be data that you really just do not want to be in somebody else's device. You need to look at the permissions behind it, and it leads into the second part as well too, in that it's extreme because now you as Alan said, you're introducing frictions that actually will hold back your teams. The real value from both teams is that there's an opportunity here for ideas for us to really sit down and look at how people are consuming data and really look at what are the things that are so mission critical that probably needs to have some level of security and some level of access. And looking at because this happens when you talk about agentic AI. In all honesty, it's the idea that you want to keep the convenience, but you need to think about how people are using the data because, quite frankly, a lot of these breaches are about social engineering at some level. And you really need to think about what the activity is that's considered normal and what could be vulnerable to some level of social engineering that would get access to that data in the first place. So it is an opportunity to kind of think about as an organization how you are running things. I know that losing data can be a bad feeling, but we are probably in a world now where we need to be ready for the idea that that can happen. And it may be a start over that might be more valuable than anything else at that point.
Yeah, here at Webflow, we have, agentic AI products that we sell to our customers, and we use a ton of agentic AI internally as well. And I think being able to think through how do we control that data, or maybe how do we just sort of like open up that data spigot a little bit for the sake of productivity while still being compliant and auditable is important. So again, it's always a balance when you think about those things, JP.
Well, the kobolds who had their sacrificial bowl ready to collect blood for biometric scanning are disappointed, and they have scurrying back into their deep crypt within the bowels of the company, as they always should. Okay, well done on that. All right, last scenario. The customers are up in arms about the flood breach. but also about the downtime that questionable ideas arrests face. Though the company recovered significantly even before the return to office, many clients say that in this day and age, that 3 days is too long, and that the downtime should have been resolved faster or avoided entirely. From their perspective, money was lost, money time was lost. Before questionable ideas arrests responds to such complaints, your CFO makes it clear that there is no budget to update or overhaul the company's infrastructure with the top of the line, cutting edge resources needed to deliver what the customers seem to be insisting on. What now? How do you approach the real need to support your IT infrastructure and respond to customers, all while navigating budget constraints such as this?
There you go first, Pierre, or you want me to?
Oh, go ahead, Allan.
Okay, thanks. I've been fortunate enough in my career to always be sort of running SaaS-based businesses. So JP, if anyone says to me like uptime isn't important, I say if the product isn't up, no one cares about the features. So I would have a pretty frank conversation with my CFO about, do you want me to be up or do you want me to not be up? Because if we're not up, we're not making any money and our customers aren't happy. So if incremental budget is 0, then I would again go back to sort of the way I prioritize things with my teams, fix top priority issues first, make sure that don't happen again, and then build amazing, innovative, in this world, AI products. So I would sacrifice innovation for uptime in that particular case. I would borrow from the innovation team, the teams that are innovating, the teams that are building the new products to make sure we had as close to 100% availability as possible. And then I would reallocate further going downstream. I mean, customers, again, if you're not up in a SaaS business, they really don't care about your new sexy product. Yeah. So I would move budget around. Is basically the short answer to your question, JP.
I think all companies are going to be challenged to. I hear what Allan's saying. I agree with him. There's a certain triage that you have to do, I think, for any company, for anything that you're trying to invest in. And for data, it can be a little tricky, but I think, again, the opportunity here is understanding how what is the things that are operating more frequently? How do they relate to your objectives, your OKRs, and your KPIs, so to speak, and organizing around those as best as possible. A lot of companies will not have an incremental budget for certain changes, but it can be very costly if they don't make the adjustment for the key operations that are going on within the company and the data that's surrounding by it.
Okay, right. Well, despite questionable ideas or us's best efforts to tank themselves in every situation, gentlemen, you have helped them live to survive through another day at least, or 3. Listen.
And more pizza.
And more pizza.
Deep dish.
You're in Chicago? You must be in Chicago.
Oh, yeah. Always,
nice.
Chicago is always deep dish.
I know. It's great.
All right.
I'm a big fan of so.
Allan, Pierre, you have been both fantastic with your insights and in dealing with my shenanigans with the tabletop exercises. Thank you so much for your perspectives on the topic of dealing with a tech disruption, and then also working through the tabletop exercises. Both of you have been fantastic. Thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank
you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been fun, and it's always good to live a little bit PTSD on post incidents, and always good to think about how do we learn from others in terms of avoiding going forward. So I appreciate the insights.